Gillian from the Colorado State University and Betty from the University of Florida. You're here under the same banner. Could you explain to me exactly what that is?
So we're here to create an International Women's Collaboratorium, which is a network.
Can you repeat that?
An International Women's Collaboratorium, which is a network of women scholars that are interested in science and climate change.
If I could just add on that, what we see is that women are very underrepresented in the sciences. And so what we're about is to try to get more women in the workforce pipeline so that they can help define the research agenda and actually carry out the research that's so important to what's happening here at this conference.
What value would that have?
Well, a collaboratorium is a collaborative working space. So what it does is it allows us to help build the capacity quite quickly. So if you look at issues regarding mitigation or adaptation strategies or developing emerging technologies, you need to have the capacity that future generation built very quickly. So a collaborative space is a way of institutions working together to address an overarching research question.
I think collaborative space is amazing. I completely see where you're coming from. But why encourage more women?
If I can say that, when you think about how creative solutions are found by bringing a lot of different viewpoints and perspectives to the table. And when you look at sort of the general makeup of the scientists that are often driving the policy, you'll see that it's not a very diverse group. And so by bringing more people to the table, women, men, color, etc., then you're going to be bringing more ideas and more perspectives, which will really, I think, advance science further.
Have you spotted any results from this already?
Well, there are two ways to look at the results. One is the actual science produced. The second is the actual network of organizations that can create a larger question or actually do larger research. And the third is actually graduating students and students of color. So do we have a future workforce that is quite diverse? And I think as the UN said, we cannot solve a global problem using half of our global brain capacity.
I wouldn't like to be the person that comes up against you. So in terms of the negotiations, where do you think we're at now? And your role, any influence on the negotiations? How do you feel about it?
Well, they're twofold. One is that we listen for the negotiation to look at knowledge gaps. We look at knowledge as being driven by information and data. So as research institutions, we look at that connection among the three. So we want the negotiation to inform us so that we can help create a research agenda to accomplish our other goal, which is, again, creating a full agenda, a full number of research scientists, getting women and girls engaged in science so that we are using our entire global capacity to ask the question.
Okay, and in terms of the fact that gender isn't actually dealt with very well within negotiations, do you have a view on that? I know it's not specific to science, and I can see that it's actually quite a different beast, as it were, but I wondered about whether that was part of your remit at all.
Well, I think that, gender is important to bring to the table because as we think about how we may respond in terms of adaptation and mitigation, the kinds of policies we put in place may actually be affected by the kinds of gender issues which may have different impacts and different consequences for society.
And I also see it as a strong part of our research agenda as well as our development agenda. So you have a policy and you need to have the different voices within that policy to make sure that things like gender get expressed as part of climate policy. And I think the Secretariat expressed it very well today that science drives policy and policy is always sort of one step behind. So we have to have the women in the science creating the questions that would then help inform policy.
Do you have any examples of female scientists that have done that?
Well, I'm sitting next to my major advisor, so I have my hero next to me.
Well, yeah, I don't know if I've driven any specific policy actions, but I think you can look, when you look at who are, the women that stand out in science, around the world and globally, they're actually probably very few. that have reached to the point that have the kind of the ear of the sort of the major policymakers around the world. We have a new, we're both from the United States, and James Lubchenco is a marine scientist that now heads the NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmosphere Administration. And so she is an example of someone, I think, that was a very well-known woman scientist that now is definitely influencing policy on ocean environments in the United States.
Okay, and in terms of the actual individual research projects that you're working on, what are they?
That we're currently working on that we perceive as being driven by this experience.
Let's go for the last one, driven by this experience.
Well, for example, when you look at mitigation and adaptation strategies, one of the things you want to look at is how do different strategies impact gender, or you could use the word demographics differently. That's a very short, and not very short, it's a very straightforward research question that you would use to gauge students in research projects, like graduate students, etc. We see our collaboratorium is that as we all sit through the COP exchanges and meetings, that by the end of this 2 weeks that we would have a series of questions that we can take back to our network of institutions to generate research proposals to ask those questions, to have the science then be able to provide some of those answers for policy. So that's a vague statement, but you get an earlier example, I think about water, use of water, water rights, types of transportation differences, or the availability of different ecosystem services like water, fuel, and other such things, are all can be looked at with a demographic lens. So you know how that impacts different people differently. If women are the main water resource, how much energy do they need to use to get water? So what is the impact to different survival when you look at a refugee camp that's created by climate? Everything ties it back together. So as researchers, we look at that interconnection, or as they said in the opening ceremony, the weaving of research and questions back to create strong policy.
So you're going to take some of these ideas back to your collaboratorium and then actually encourage research projects on the basis of your visit to Cancun.
That's correct. So our task here is to work together in our workshop on Saturday and come up with our core research agendas driven by the policy and the negotiations here. And then we go back as researchers to actually then write the proposals to generate the funding, to engage the students. But it also creates a cohort here. So we can work together as a cohort, so we can support students coming up through the system, so we can support developing countries, develop the capacity, especially for women and girls. So that's the idea of having a collaboratorium, a network, so we can work. My particular interest is women of color in the US are very underrepresented in the sciences. So by networking across different institutions, we can now support those women so they stay in the sciences and they don't get discouraged or move on or go to other fields.
And if we look at the women in developing countries, what percentage of those are part of this group? What percentage of women in developing countries are attended to, as in percentage they are of the actual group?
What percentage?
Oh, yeah, looking at the ratios. And
I think I cannot answer that question. I don't think it's any better than what it is here in the U.S. And I think what you see this sort of pyramid happening. So when you look at undergraduates, and we're speaking more from the biological sciences, or at least because our expertise is more in that area, but when you look at sort of the percentage of undergraduates, there are more women in biology as undergraduates. When you go to graduate school, it's about maybe half and half. But then as you go up into the assistant professor rank, it's a little bit lower. The associate professor rank, women begin to drop out even more. Full professor rank, it's, so there's this continual loss of women in the chain as you move up, basically, during their careers. And I think there's a variety of reasons for that, but it's a recognized problem that we really need to do something about.
It's across industry, though, isn't it, really? Any industry you look at, the further up the chain you go, the more women drop out.
I think that's right, but I think it's particularly bad in the sciences.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, there have been several recent reports that highlight that for science, technology, engineering, mathematics, the STEM disciplines in the U.S., that we're losing a huge number of women and minorities in those fields. And that report came out just in October of this year for the U.S., so we've not made progress in terms of making sure that the scientists are as multicultural, multidisciplinary, and have as many views as society as a whole. So that when you ask a science question, you're incorporating all of those viewpoints and you're not overlooking a particular viewpoint. And that's why it's so important in a global question like climate change, that it be multidisciplinary, it be diverse, it be multicultural, and it be gendered, men and women combined.
So which countries are part of your group?
Sorry, say again.
Which countries are part of your group?
Well, it depends on how you define our group. That's the question. We just started. So our big workshop is on Saturday. So when you meet with us on Sunday, we'll have a different list of companies who are formally part of our group in terms of research proposals. Right now is Mexico and Africa. And Africa as a continent, not as a country. So Tanzania and Kenya are the two that are involved right now. We also will be adding Australia. And hopefully we can look as it grows through, because you have to grow it individual by individual, so cohort approach. So you have to go to a university that is willing to work with us, that we can partner with, that we all work together, that we have to collaborate together to say this is part of our network and our partnership.
And how are you funded?
We're funded in part through an NSF grant that's created a network that's called the Rocky Mountain Sustainability and Science Network. And part of what we're doing here is that it puts us together to apply for more funding. Because one of the challenges when you do an international project and you go to a funder and say we want to do an international network is they want you to be able to demonstrate that that network will persist. And so you have to have the first step before a funder believes the second step will actually get to a research project. It's very hard to conduct research across a huge scale. And that's why we bring the University of Florida, which has its Latin American connections, Colorado State, which works very strongly in Africa, to bring these 2 points. And our other major partner here is George Washington University, which works a lot in Eastern Europe and Latin America as well. So by bringing some core point universities together, we can now network across our own contacts to start the collaboratorium.
And the web address is?
Sorry?
And your web address is?
We're still working on it.
Still working on it. No, it's all very new.
We do have a Women in Sustainability group that just got started. We have a Facebook on women and climate change.
Okay.
So that's our idea, and I'd have to give credit to Oxford University held a meeting on women and climate change, and through our discussions we talked about a collaboratorium as being a wonderful way to start. Because the other issue is that women like to network, and we work well as cohorts. So we need to build the social part into the science part so that women persist because they do have a network that mentors them, that works together. You can meet with your major advisor, et cetera, and keep that support system going throughout your career, not just in school, but throughout your career.
It sounds like you're forcing a paradigm shift.
Yeah, exactly.
We hope so.
We hope so.
Okay, ladies, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much.